Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on the future of interoperability in the US. We'll just wait for a little moment until people are in. And in the meantime, if you'd like to drop us a line with your name and where you work, we'd love to hear from where people are at the moment. Great, lots of early birds. Like to see it. Fantastic. Now that people are slowly coming in, I thought what I might start off with before I do introductions is just get a sense of where people are in terms of their level of understanding of interoperability or interoperability in the US. So we're going to do a small poll just to get a sense if people are beginners, if they have intermediate knowledge or advanced knowledge. So I'll just publish that poll now. Would love to get your ideas. This is great. We're getting a bell curve.
Just that I would have expected. This is wonderful.
Yeah, this is great, and I see some familiar names as well coming in, so
Absolutely.
That's great.
Maybe give it a few more seconds and then we jump in.
Okay, I think we've confirmed our bell curve, and we can move on. So let me just quickly get started. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Arjun. I'm the editorial lead for eDRV. Work on their marketing at the company, and if you'd like to get in touch with me, just feel free to reach out. I've already gotten in touch with a lot of people, inviting them to the webinar. We've had a great deal of interest in interoperability and what's fresh and exciting in the US. And so we had a lot of people call in and ask us about doing a webinar, particularly with our network. And we thought of names who could help us out. And one of the first names we had was Trishan. And so I'd really love to introduce Trishan, who is the CEO of Hubject North America. He is responsible for the business growth and operations within the US, Canada, and Mexico. He's based in California and joined Hubject in 2022. And for those of you who know Hubject, know that it's a B2B software company championing interoperability and facilitating seamless, secure EV charging. In a previous life, Trishan took two clean tech companies from startup to scale up. They were PodPoint, as well as a leading electric fleet software provider called VeriCity. So we're really, really excited to have you on board, Trishan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to the eDRV's team as well for hosting the event. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. And to my left, if you're looking right now, maybe I can just get rid of this top screen, is Bhaskar. Bhaskar is obviously our CEO and co-founder of eDRV. He has a passion for clean energy transition and clean mobility, and co-founded eDRV in the hope of making it the world's first EV charging network operations platform available entirely through APIs. Bhaskar started his career in the semiconductor industry before running operations at the environmental nonprofit NRDC, and also worked on climate policy in addition to the Paris Agreement. So thanks, Bhaskar, as well for joining us.
Well, it's great to be here, Arjun. And yeah, really excited to welcome Trishan and the discussion later today on interoperability.
I wanted to let people know that at any point they can ask questions in the chat as well. I'll make sure to get through all of them. We wanted to make this a bit more of an informal dialogue for our first webinar in this series. At a later stage, we'll have a poll on, you could at any point ask us questions about what we're talking about, but also include topics you might want to see in the future that we get into a little bit more depth. So we're going to have a bit more of an informal dialogue in this session. There won't be any slides that we offer, but we will be able to take your questions. And like I mentioned, if there's anything in particular depth you'd like to cover, we'd love to hear from you. Do let us know. You can also let us know after the webinar. We'll basically be covering 4 various topics. One is around the changing landscape within interoperability. The second is around roaming in the USA. The third is on plug and charge. And lastly, we'll be going about lessons learned from both Trishan and Bhaskar, who've also had an experience in Europe about what interoperability looked like there. So without further ado, let's get into it. Maybe Trishan, I could start with you. So we've had a couple of months now where news has been quick and fast about new OEMs like Ford, Rivian, Nissan, Volvo joining the North American charging standard. And the biggest question we've had from our network is, what does this mean for interoperability? And what does this mean for interoperability within the US? I'd love to throw it to you first up.
Yeah, absolutely, and great question to start with. I think it's been top of everyone's mind with the news of Ford, GM, and no doubt there'll be others that follow as well. I think overall it's a good thing for interoperability, and certainly from a Hubject perspective, maybe just to get this out initially, it doesn't. We are plug agnostic, so to speak, so it doesn't affect us from a software standpoint. But I think we also have to maybe unpack what it means in terms of in a practical sense. I think the signal to market is great, though. That Tesla, the largest charging infrastructure network here in the US in terms of DC fast charging, is opening up to other brands. Ultimately, I think this is great for the EV drivers that aren't Tesla drivers, but there's some complexity in it as well, right? You know, Bhaskar can speak to this as well. In other markets, we've had some experience with CHAdeMO, CCS, and now NACS. I think there is also a little bit to discuss around driver. Bringing in more complexity can also confuse the driver a little bit, especially in an earlier market. And then I think there's a discussion around, you know, what it will actually look like and what the implications are. So for those that are adopting the hardware natively versus those that might use an adapter, what do we know about the reliability of the adapter and so forth? Because especially here in North America, as we're so early on, one of the things we need to be conscious of is, you know, we don't want to make the driver experience worse. We want to make it better. And I think, you know, for those of you on the call that drive a Tesla, have driven one, the plug is great. The form factor is fantastic. It works just as intended to. But I think we can get to this a bit later with this Tesla hardware and Tesla software. It's all an integrated stack. So what happens when we take that to other brands, Ford, GM, and so forth, and bring in other software players as well? So I think, to answer your question, I think it's great for interoperability because it means we're not necessarily working in silos, as the industry has tended to do for a little bit now in North America, but we're starting to now incorporate all EV drivers. But there's a while to get there to that that sweet spot where it all just works seamlessly, I think.
Yeah, just to jump in there, yeah, definitely. You know, the funny thing is, today the only thing that's standard about the NACS is the S in the acronym. But of course,
Exactly.
the big announcement first by Tesla and Ford, and then continuing, shortly after, pretty much every major auto OEM, with the obvious exception of the German auto OEMs, being that they will adopt, and they will at least be adding some vehicles in their lineup with the NACS option, means that a flurry of activity is now underway to really make it a standard. And I think eDRV is a part of the Charin task force that is currently working on. I know Amit from Hubject is also a part, as are many of the people in the room today. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to truly make it a standard. And I think that work's going to happen because the clock's ticking. So by 2025, I think the models are going to start to arrive. What we've also heard is every major EV charging network has announced that they will both be adding some charging stations with the NACS connector. There's not a clear indication whether anybody will be making a full 180-degree turn, but what seems to be the writing on the wall is that we're heading towards a future where there will be at least two connectors for at least that intermediate period, both NACS as well as CCS. What that changes into over the longer term, we'll see. But the work is cut out for charging service providers, our customers. The Hubject, Charin, SAE has also announced that they will be working on making NACS the standard. So there's a bunch of activity that's underway. I think the industry is very excited. I think it's a massive opportunity. And let's not forget the holy grail for all of this is how do you get everyone who is driving an EV to have that Tesla-like very convenient, seamless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So both fairly cautiously optimistic. Sorry, Trishan, I cut you off there.
I was just agreeing with Bhaskar. I think definitely so. There's a lot of work to be done in now, I guess, testing it and seeing what the implications are with all the different software and hardware vendors. And obviously, one thing to keep in mind with the OEMs as well is, there's a lot of lifting to be done on the OEM side, right? The charge controllers that go into the vehicle, the planning for that, the software and hardware is typically at least 2 years out. So we're in for a longer journey. But to Bhaskar's point, I think if we can get towards it through the next couple of years, it's going to be really exciting if we have a standard that everyone can adopt, and ultimately it's easier for the driver, right? I think I always reflect on, do I want to, as an EV driver, pull up to a station and have to think about what type of plug I'm using or pull out an adapter? Not really. I just want to be able to plug in and charge my vehicle. So we want to get to that.
I'm sure you have a trunk full of converters.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the nicest experience, and we're in the industry, right? So you can imagine as we get more mainstream or to the mass market, we want to make it as simple as possible, right? And I think that's part of the appeal of the NACS plug type. People have had a great experience with Tesla, so they say, why can't we have this for other manufacturers?
And we've just had a question about if there was a link to 4-month legislation from Sebastian. I think you're referring to NEVI, if I'm not mistaken. We did a guide on that, which has a small part on roaming. So do check out our guide. And there's also links to the actual law if you'd like to read the whole document there. So, I mean, you both are really optimistic. I'm wondering if I could play devil's advocate here for a moment and say, here you do have a conflict in the sense of public infrastructure requiring CCS. There was a recent report out by NEVI, which was conspicuously silent about what it would require of NACS or NACS. Any thoughts on maybe in the interim what the consumer experience might be for people charging up? Would they have to see various connectors? Would there be longer waiting times? Would it be hard to find chargers? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can go first, and love to hear Trishan's point as well. Yeah, those are great questions. I think, Arjun, let's not forget, I think if you just look at the lead times right now for pretty much the equipment that's in the ground, there's a lot of lag in there. I think what this does is, in a way, sends out a strong signal to the market that there will be a shift. And I'm pretty sure, if I was in the Tesla policy team right now, I would be talking to every legislator, every state about, how to make sure that those dollars for, IRA funding, NEVI funding will be applicable to NACS. I think also which is what you've also heard from all the charging networks. So I think, this is very quick from a policy timeline perspective, but I think from an end consumer perspective, this is going to play out over the next several years, or at least next several months at a minimum. So it will be a while before your Ford vehicles with an NACS connector and your GM vehicles with an NACS connector start to roll out, and then I think the charging networks will be ready, and you'll see a very steady but noticeable transition to the plug.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's obviously some time for, as I mentioned, for the native ports, if so to speak, to appear in the Ford vehicles and GM vehicles and any other OEMs that have made announcements. So in the interim, I think there will be an adapter. Don't necessarily. We don't have much data on the adapter, so I'd love to hear from the audience if there is anyone that's done any testing with this. Something that Hubject is looking at is doing some testing with it from a software perspective, just to ensure there's still the same reliability as with the plug. But I think what's interesting about the White House announcement that came out, I mean, it was very quick, as Bhaskar said, after GM and Ford had made their announcements, and it was very clear that there will be, in terms of the funding at least, a broadening to support CCS or NACS, but CCS as a minimum. Now, as Bhaskar said, I think that might shift as more manufacturers move. But there's real world implications, like you said. You've got to go out and retrofit existing. Newer ones, I would say, would have both options for now. And then obviously, as I mentioned, there's the OEM implications, and I guess the meat of what eDrives and Hubject do as well. The software side still has to be ironed out. But we have all the right people in the room. I think it's just going to take a little bit of time, and in the interim, I think what'll be interesting is to see, with adapters and so forth, how it would work.
Yeah, I just want to quickly highlight a couple of very insightful comments that I'm just reading as as we're talking. So Sarah is mentioning a little bit just around the question around whether this is specifically just plug and charge or roaming with RFID. RFID doesn't seem to be as popular in the US as it has been in other regions. But I think you've hit the nail on the head there, with payments being a key aspect of it. And I know when we talk about interoperability, and I want to make sure we come back to that topic in the second or the third question that Arjun has on his list, because right now we want to focus on the connector for a minute. But payments are very much the heart of the ultimate seamless charging experience, right? And I think that's why also both the promise of can plug and charge do that, what Tesla drivers experience, that seamless experience, because you never pull out your wallet. You basically just plug in and you walk away and it works. So I think payment terminals, whether it's a swipe or whether it happens automatically when you plug in, that experience has to be as simplified as possible. No doubt there will be requirements of a certain set of drivers who may prefer one over the other, but I think ultimately what the industry will want to do is to offer that choice. I also want to quickly just nod to a comment by David, which is just around the adapters, and I 100% agree. I was joking with Arjun earlier on the call before this webinar that, we don't have interoperability for these guys. Like everybody has either like a iPhone charger or a USB-C, and then you still have USB-Cs that kind of work, and then sometimes they don't. So there is going to be a requirement for adopters, and people will kind of get used to it. But I think the simpler we can make it for everyone, I think the better. So. And then finally, I just want to point out something that Marilyn, you're sharing about NEVI. I think just wanted to go back that, point taken, which is that the states will issue guidelines which are, which can tweak the NEVI funding and, can adapt that to. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was some announcement out of Tesla which said that Texas, which said that NACS would also be included in NEVI funding.
That's correct. Yeah. Exactly. So I think it's a really valid point that Marlon makes. Is now it's important to look at what the states are announcing, right? Because the federal guidelines are broader, but it's a state one, so it'll be very specific. And obviously, some of the larger states that make announcements, I think the others may follow.
Could I just go over this question that David also talked about in the questions? It says, will the USA continue to require that NACS add touchscreens and credit card readers, both of which are prone to maintenance issues? What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's mutually exclusive in the sense that, NACS is really about the plug between the vehicle and the charger. And then the charger can still have, credit card swiping terminals or not, based on the network and whatever the regulation might be. So in my mind, they're sort of determined at an independent level. Love to hear Trishan's thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think David raises a really valid point about the maintenance issues with the card readers and the screens. I think we're seeing in California, at least, the legislation's now moving away from the requirement of credit card readers, just because I think industry, in terms of the networks, found it difficult. And then also from a customer experience, what they found is if you were going to pull out your credit card, it's just as easy to scan a QR code and put it into your phone, or have a wallet associated with an app. And we've done some interesting studies actually with RFID and credit card readers in Europe, where we have much larger volumes on the network, and the failure rate is significantly higher. We're going to talk a little bit more about plug and charge, and we've talked about the Tesla experience, but how we take that to other manufacturers and across all networks. And I think that's where plug and charge works really nicely in terms of alleviating some of the issues you have with credit card payments. But as Bhaskar rightly says, whether it's a NACS or a CCS or even a CHAdeMO plug, that's still a little bit separate from the payments discussion, and how you would authenticate, authorize. That still has to happen behind the scenes, and that's where software players come in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wonder maybe if I could just use a couple of questions brought about by Johnny to go on to our next topic, which is moving on from just the charger and cars into the charging networks as well, and the communications between them. So he asks as well, what's the implication on the ROI for the existing chargers or non-Tesla sticks? And if I'm a generic asset owner in North America, what's my next step here to provide charging for my clients, customers, or tenants in the case of multifamily?
Yeah, let me take that. Let's kind of just to reiterate, why do all of this, right? Like the whole point of why should charging networks be interoperable? It's really fundamentally about, first and foremost, about the charging experience. Like, drivers will want to be able to charge anywhere. You can fill at any gas station. You want to have the same experience when it comes to driving an EV. I think it's also, it just needs to be homogeneous. It makes sense for charging networks themselves to kind of lend themselves to being interoperable. So basically through partnerships and or connections to other networks, because ultimately, let's not forget, this is about ROI on the investment that networks are making. I think, Johnny, to your point there, the ROIs are higher if as many drivers as need charging can find those locations, can transact on those locations, and can have a very simple sort of an experience around that. And I think, and ultimately that's what is going to drive the adoption at the very market level, at the very high level, right? So I think if you are an investor in a charging network, I would strongly encourage, and this is what we tell all our customers, to make it accessible to other networks. Essentially provide that transparency through the pricing that you set up, through the connectivity that you have with other applications and other networks, because that's what will ultimately result in highest utilization and then the biggest return on the investment for the infrastructure.
Sorry, Trishan, do you want to add to that?
I agree. I think the actual critical decision in this NACS debate or transition is really on the OEM side and on the site host side. And obviously, as Bhaskar said, utilization is key here. But I do think that I saw it mentioned in the comment as well about CCS being around for a little bit longer. There's still a large quantity of vehicles that use CCS and will continue to do so. I think we're going to see this period where you'll have vehicles that do both. So for site hosts, the consideration will be, I guess, whether you provide both in the interim. And as Bhaskar said, that becomes a conversation around utilization. But keep in mind that there are adapters and so forth out there as well. So having a look at the types of vehicles that are using your sites and the split is super important there. But there are interim solutions that mean that you're not having to lock yourself into one or the other straight away. And I think the market will start to determine as some of these models come out with either one or two of these ports, where we move from there.
Trishan, I'm interested in your thoughts on getting the true roaming experience, like we do with ATMs, or we do with like we mentioned with cell phones, where we don't really think about changing our SIM card if we move from Texas to Kentucky. Getting that seamless experience. Where is most of the hard work going to be moving forward?
Yeah, the hard work is on the software side, but it's relatively easy actually compared to the model where we're currently implementing in the US. So we're going through, again, similar to the plug type with the roaming experience here in the United States. At least we are going through a little bit of a transition period, and maybe for some context for those of you that aren't aware, part of that is just driven by the market fragmenting, and what I mean by that is, in a good way, we're having a lot more CPOs, a lot more networks come into the United States now, which had previously been kind of dominated by charge points, your Teslas, your Electrify Americas. We're seeing a lot of these smaller networks pop up, whether it be via utilities or companies coming in and saying, actually, we now want to run a network. We're seeing a bunch of great EMPs come in as well, eDRVs being one of them, serving specific needs for different market segments. So there's a little bit more independence between the networks and the app operators and the wallets. So this is where roaming gets really interesting. And I think you're right. When the banking analogies may be a good one. When you go to pay with your MasterCard or your Visa or your Amex, typically, you go to a retailer and they accept all three, or at least a couple of them, but you don't have to think about having a different card for different retailers. And similarly, I think why we want to move in terms of charging experiences, regardless of the charging infrastructure I use publicly or even at home, I should be able to pay for it and select my own wallet. So how do we bring that put that driver choice back in the hands of the customer. And one of the ways to do that is to work with someone like a Hubject. So we're basically an aggregator of networks and EMPs, which means that you'll connect to us once and you have access as an EMP to all the networks on our platform. And for a network, you connect to us and you have access to all the EMPs and the associated wallets, which means that the customer goes in to use your infrastructure and they can choose to pay with however they feel like. We're going through that transition right now, but interested to get Bhaskar's thoughts, because I know that there's a lot of work to be done behind the scenes, and right now I think we're seeing the market kind of transition. You've got, similar to the NACS really, you've got some CPOs moving towards this roaming model that I'm speaking about, and you've got others that are maybe operating a little bit more independently.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I don't want to be the party pooper, but I on the one hand, let me agree. Okay, let me agree outright that in the short term, there's a lot of work, of course, that needs to be done on the software side. I think, I'm reading again in the comments, there's a lot of support for credit card readers. And of course, it's a known devil, right? Like, you get it. It's simple. You swipe and you're done, and then you walk away. Let's also not forget that, that's kind of like a one-on-one application of that fuel. You go to a gas station, you get like, I don't know, 30, 40 liters or gallons at a time, and then you pay and you walk away. I think what we're witnessing is sort of a transition towards a paradigm where, well, first of all, EVs will consume kilowatt hours, but then also, you're setting the stage for EVs to kind of feed back those kilowatt hours. So credit card just simply does not work. It's not a one-directional flow, it's a two-directional flow. So I think, a lot of these new technologies will be really, optimized, utilized to the fullest when you are really setting it up for that intelligent bidirectional flow that can happen. And then when I think about that future, you're really looking at a lot of work being done by auto OEMs, not just where we are today, but, will continue to need to be done. A lot of work by charging point operators and our customers, for example, who are providing these services, connections with utilities, players like Hubject and sort of other nodes. So I think this is almost like, I always say we're in the 1G equivalent of EV charging, so what does the 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G future look like? And a lot of that work will need to be done by auto OEMs, by utilities, by CPOs, and sort of each one of the industry ecosystem players. But no doubt that today, once the plugs are out of the way, the bulk of work is back, is solvable through that software connectivity between the players.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the important thing is that that's a great analogy with the telecoms. The important thing about what the approach we're talking about is it sets us up to then build upon with all the capabilities that having an integrated software ecosystem allows you to do. Vehicle to grid is one of them. I saw the question about vehicle to grid versus vehicle to house. I think importantly, it enables both, right? Vehicle V2X, we call it often. But the other piece is, I think we still think, as Bhaskar rightly highlighted, in the gas station model of, I just go, I put in my card details, I fill up the tank and I leave. But as he rightly mentioned, there's a lot more you can do there. And I think importantly, there's a lot more in that infrastructure providers are going to be where you want to park, right? Rather than you go and sit out at a gas station or equivalent of a gas station and charge your vehicle. That opens up a different realm of integrated kind of software offerings and incentives for the customer. And I think we're not quite there yet, but similar to V2G, there's going to be incentive for, your Costco's and your Walmarts of the world to say, hey, if you use our app and charge at our store, there's discounts in store or whatever it may be. We're not quite there yet, but that's where I think the world we're moving into. And I think also, again, using the phone analogy, we've gotten quite used to now not having to pull out a physical credit card, but paying for stuff through our phone. I think it's going to get similar with charging as well. Is you set up your account, you plug in, and the rest of it kind of gets taken care of. To what Bhaskar was saying, all the complex stuff gets dealt with. You just set up your profile however you want to do it, and the rest gets taken care of. And but I do take, there's some points in there around equity as well with credit card readers, and I think that's super important as well, is that is having the availability of multiple payment options. But I think looking at the future that we're talking about, there's just so much more you can do with the integrated software ecosystem that gets really exciting if you're in the industry. And I'm sure a few of you have discussed that too.
Yeah, I mean, given this this debate that's been going on in our chat of credit card readers over no credit card readers, I think it'd be a good time to go into what are the challenges of plug and charge. Is it an easy transition? I saw there was also a question from Richard about who's going to get the data. Would love to hear your thoughts on what the challenges would be of plug and charge.
Yeah, I do like Sebastian's comment about hosts giving you some beers for negative kilowatt hour prices. I think those type of incentives are great. I'm not sure if aligning drinking with driving is appropriate, but nonetheless, I think there'll be incentives out there for people to charge their vehicles in some places. The challenges for
I think that'll be our next API, won't it, Bhaskar? Free beers.
Yeah.
Beer as an API? Sure, sign me up.
Happy to work on that also with you guys. But yeah, I think on the challenges of plug and charge, I think maybe we and I saw a question also about the ISO standard, which I'm happy to take. I can answer high level, and happy to take more detailed questions, obviously offline, to save the audience. But I think the flip side is to maybe discuss what plug and charge is actually trying to achieve before we discuss the challenges. And you know, we talked about it and alluded to it in the introduction about how do we bring the Tesla-like experience to others. The reason the Tesla experience works so well right now, I believe, is because it's a really integrated software hardware stack that Tesla have perfected. So as a customer, I think one of the people in the chat, I forget the name, I think it may have been David, mentioned how easy it is. How does that translate to other manufacturers when you start to bring in third-party manufacturers, other networks, and other EMPs? And the way that plug and charge does that is through an ecosystem, a certificate exchange ecosystem, using the ISO 15118-2 standard, and -20 is coming. I can speak to that later. So the complexity and the challenges around it are really working with those three parties. But I think we're getting to a stage now where actually in the US, as a market, we're actually leading on plug and charge. And the reason is because people got used to that Tesla-like experience and started saying, well, why can't I have it in my Audi on Electrify America? Why can't I have it on other networks? So we've actually seen the uptake in plug and charge across whole networks in the US and a number of manufacturers now in the US happen significantly quicker. The recent NEVI final rule announcement has accelerated that. But I guess the challenges are really in the detail, right? Is getting that experience across multiple players in the market. So we're starting to see a large number of OEMs. Pretty much every major OEM will have a model that's plug and charge capable in the next few years. And now from a network perspective, I think, you know, the plug and charge team will tell you that they're super busy onboarding now another 5 or 6 networks in North America to be plug and charge enabled. But the key is we need to have as many as possible on there, so that as a consumer, you're not going to a network and finding out that it's not plug and charge capable when you get there. And that involves not just the onboarding process, but it involves, you know, making sure that the POI data, all those kind of things are up to date.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from the perspective of implementer on the plug-in charge side. So yeah, I mean, of course, if you're on the eDRV network, then plug-in charge will be available to our customers. So we're very excited to work with the Hubject team on making that happen. Also taking away a little bit of the edge of actually implementing it in-house. So making sure that a lot of the APIs, a lot of the customer, the user, the auth pertaining, or the pricing, aspects can still be managed through the APIs, while under the hood, eDRV takes care of the implementation of plugin charge. So, so we'll try and play our part in the ecosystem to make plugin charge more accessible. But as you said, Trishan, a lot of the work needs to happen with the OEM's blessing. I know that it will also be critical that more OEMs allow multiple certificates to be placed on the vehicles. I think that's something that I believe BMW announced last year, if I'm not mistaken, as one of the first OEMs who will let certificates be placed not just by themselves, but also others. Or maybe Volkswagen were also doing that, I think, through an update in the ID4s, I believe. So in any case, I think there's a lot of work to be done all around. But I think, again, a collaborative approach across OEMs, networks, and hubs like Hubject will kind of hasten that whole transition for sure.
Yeah, certainly. I think that hit the nail on the head. The major challenge is OEMs that are making decisions that obviously impact vehicles on the road for a considerable time, right? From when an owner has one, and some of those decisions around hardware and software on the vehicle and plug and charge capability are super important. Multi-contract handling, but Bhaskar's right. We demonstrated this with a BMW i7 and EVgo at the recent EVS conference in Sacramento. But that's a type of technology that enables us to do a lot more with things like plug and charge. So OEMs making those decisions are super important. CPOs, obviously, I think the compatibility question has been almost answered by the NEVI funding ruling if they want to access NEVI. But I think boil it back to the customer experience, whether you're an OEM or a CPO, and you've got an EV driver going out there, okay, saying which network should I charge at, and which vehicle should I buy potentially. They're going to be comparing the experience to other experiences out there. The Tesla experience, the Audi experience with Electrify America, or other brands that do it. So I think that's the key is plug and charge has now become part of the customer expectation in terms of the best customer experience. So how do you make sure you maintain that, and then obviously can build on it. I just want to
something that I
quickly
didn't expect as well. The way you're talking about how Americans have come to expect it because of the experience with Tesla. I'd be super interested in seeing if there's any lessons that we could learn from other parts of the world. Do you know of any other places that have used plug and charge, and maybe things that we should do or we shouldn't do when we're going forward with plug and charge?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think we're actually leading on the plug and charge on plug and charge deployment. In terms of lessons learned, I think a lot of it is on the OEM side. I think CPOs understand the value for the reasons I mentioned. The consumer has almost driven it, which is super cool. I think one of the challenges with plug and charge and it's going to is that it ties in with the broader ecosystem. So we like to think of plug and charge as the icing on this kind of e-mobility software cake. It does this fantastic thing of identifying the vehicle and the driver and a wallet, right, that's associated with it when you plug in. But behind the scenes, and Bhaskar will tell you this, there's a ton of work that goes on, including what's called authorization. And one of the things we've unfortunately done in the US to date is kind of disassociate plug and charge with the authorization piece and the wallet and everything else that's built behind it. But importantly, you can't just have the icing. We have to look at the whole cake, and part of that cake is the roaming discussion. We're now getting to a stage where that's there. But again, I think if you're introducing more third-party operators, apps that exist without an affiliation necessarily to a specific OEM or network, but are a little bit more independent and offering kind of aggregation services, it's super important that you have some kind of way to integrate multiple networks quickly to provide that authorization. Because as a wallet, you need to have a tie-in to the specific network as well. Plug and charge, as I mentioned, is great at identifying and authenticating that the driver is who they say they are, but it's everything else that goes behind it.
Yeah, I want to jump in there because I think you said a lot there, I think, Trishan, and I think we could talk for hours about this.
We could go for another few hours, I think, on that conversation, but maybe I left a cookie for the follow-up webinar.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to say three things very quickly, and I think, Arjun, I'll start with the question that you framed. You basically framed it as what's happened elsewhere and how's it different from the US, and what does that mean, right? So I think I'll start off with a comment. Like when I drive around in say Netherlands or Norway or in Germany, the first thing that stands out to me is, yes, there are a lot of Teslas, but there are a lot of other EVs. So I think it's very interesting to see, and this is just absolutely subjective view. You know, I'm probably wrong, but it's just like when you drive around in a country, I think the distribution of EV models in the US is much more heavily skewed towards Tesla. So in a sense, you know, it is natural that, you know, more EV drivers in the US want to have that same experience because, you know, there are fewer of them who drive other vehicles. So it's a bit of a convoluted logic there. Like you know, when you drive around, say in an Audi or a Volkswagen or another vehicle, there is definitely, like, Ionity offers plug and charge, if I'm not mistaken. You know, you just don't hear as much about it. So in a way, I think I'm not surprised that the American market is where you're seeing the most adoption for plug and charge there, Trishan. You raised another very important topic that's fundamentally, you know, auth or authentication or identity. And I think at its heart, interoperability, particularly when it comes to charging experience, is really about, can I carry my user credentials with me when I go from one network to another? And if you could solve for that, then essentially you've solved the problem of, you know, I don't need to tell everyone who I am or create a new account. I use the same account, right? So in a way, and then plug and charge solves it very elegantly. There are other ways to do that. I mean, we talked about that a little bit. A final point, I think, just which is around the implementation of plug and charge itself. And I think, let's not forget, you know, there's been a lot of news lately about cybersecurity around, you know, what does, you know, what is the, you know, all this massive rollout for EV charging infrastructure mean for, you know, national security, for hacking, for all that stuff. And what plug and charge does, and I think ISO 15118 does, is to kind of create sort of these certificates at every node along the way. So you literally have a certificate for the vehicle, for the charging station, for the network, and then the backend, right? So essentially what you're doing is to significantly enhance just how secure this whole ecosystem is and becomes. And I think if you can also solve for the consumer experience problem along the way, then you've really, you know, tried, and you really just achieved the next generation of what, you know, charging experience needs to look like.
Trishan, that you have a champion in the chat, who is Sebastian, who says that with Hubject he's able to access 480 different networks on CPOs. So it's fantastic, and he'll also be in Berlin later. This is on, and I've just added the link for people to join the Hubject conference as well.
I think, as Bhaskar said, we could probably talk for hours on some of these topics, and a bunch of great questions coming through. So it's probably a good time to mention that we have a conference in Berlin later this month, at the end of the month, which we host at the UREF campus in Berlin, and it is an international conference on interoperability. So a lot of the topics we've discussed today we'll unpack in greater detail. We have about 3,000 to 4,000 people come through over the 2 days. Myself, the team will be there, as well as our European colleagues and a lot of EMPs, CPOs, OEMs. If you can't make it, there's a great opportunity to see what you can whether you can attend some of the virtual sessions. And the good news is, if you can't make it this year, next year we're hoping to do the same in North America. But it's a fantastic conference. It's now taking a kind of global viewpoint, and with regards to lessons learned, I think it's super cool to see what's happening in some of the mature e-mobility markets, right? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, but we can maybe learn from some of those lessons and do it even better. Make it a better driving experience for American EV drivers.
Yes, absolutely. Can definitely speak for the quality of the ICNC. So yeah, I'll be there. So would look forward to connecting with the team there. Yeah, similarly, I think I was going to ask you, when are we getting the North America event? So it's great that it's already on your list there.
Definitely, we just need to figure out where we're going to have it and when, with the conference schedule that's coming up. But yeah, it should be great. I think the market's now at a level where we can have a really robust discussion and then have a lot of participants, which is really cool.
Great, and I don't know if we can get to all of our questions remaining, but I'm just putting my email for if you guys want to send me a question, I can direct them. I saw there was a question for Trishan as well. I did kind of want to end with a question that I saw from Brett, because I thought it was a very nice practical question. Let me see if I can find it. So it's saying, Brett's saying, with some automakers going with NACS and the group of 7 creating their own network, should a site host be waiting to install their chargers until everything shakes out? What do you guys think?
That's a good question. Let me try, and love to hear your thoughts later. So if you ask me, my view is, this transition is going to happen over the next several years. I think today you can't go wrong if you're doing level 2 charging. I think is almost not at all impacted by this yet. Maybe there'll be level 2 charging with NACS connectors. So if you're focused on that segment, I think there's probably a little less for you to worry about. But if you're indeed focusing on the fast charging segment, then I think probably the best bet is what all the networks are doing, which is to hedge and to make sure that you're kind of preparing for NACS, trying to understand what that looks like, but then continuing to support CCS as well as NACS.
Sorry, Trishan, did you want to add anything to that?
I also saw a vote pop up.
Yeah, I saw the vote pop up. No, I think that's right. I would agree with what Bhaskar mentioned there.
Yeah, cool. And I'm really, really happy with all the questions that came in. And as I mentioned, I've left my email for you to get in touch with. I would also really love to see what kind of topics you'd like to see us get into depth in. If you'd also like to be a part of our webinar, let us know. We'd love to continue the conversation on interoperability in the US. So I really appreciate you taking your time today, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks, Trishan.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.